All right, let's talk about Halo Infinite because it has been a wild ride waiting for this game to come out, almost 6 years long. And now that the game has been out for a couple weeks, I've really been able to sit on the thoughts that I have about this game. And I have so much that I need to say about the campaign, the multiplayer, and especially all the monetization and storefront BS that's going on right now. But I want to save all that stuff for a separate video, and this one is going to be solely dedicated to talking about the campaign, the open world, the enemies, and the overall story. And obviously, we're probably going to get into some light spoiler territory in this, so just keep that in mind as we go along. And we're doing something pretty different today, so be sure to let me know what you guys think of the whole new setup and formatting. So before we get into the meat of my thoughts on this game, let me just give you the brief summary. It's complicated. I love this game. It's easily my favorite Halo since Halo Reach, and at times when I'm playing, I feel like it's battling for that spot on the list, but I don't know. I don't want to feel like I have to choose. But even though I love a lot of things about this game, and I think it does a lot of things, most of it extremely well, there's also a lot of things that I felt like it fell kind of flat for me, especially when you're talking about some of the aspects of the story, the characters, and especially the open world, which I guess let's get into that first. So Zeta Halo, it's big, it's beautiful, and it's extremely interesting to explore. But especially after beating the game, it left me feeling like it was kind of a blank canvas. And by that I mean that even though it's big and it's massive and it's extremely detailed, there's not really a lot in it, which is a shame because the stuff that is there is really damn good. I just wish there was more of it. The Banished encampments, the fob sites, and the bosses especially are something that really surprised me. They're all really awesome, especially the brutes and the elites. They all have different weapons and they attack you in different ways, different armors that look really cool and are kind of like a combination of all their armors from the previous games, which is another thing that I really appreciate about the game overall, is how well it incorporated all the design elements from all the games and kind of combined them into the game in a way that makes sense, because the Banished are scavengers who just kind of take armor and weapons and vehicles wherever they can find them. So they're kind of this mix and mash of all these different eras of Halo, which is something I thought was really cool and that I really appreciate, especially because they figured out a way to make it lore accurate, I guess. And the Banished are easily one of the best aspects of this game, because when long-running series try and do spiritual reboots, they kind of tend to reinvent the wheel a little bit too much. Like with Gears of War is a good example of this, where they completely killed the Locust, brought them back but different, and they're not as fun to fight and they're not as memorable design-wise as the original. But what I like about the Banished is that the elevator pitch is pretty simple. It's the Covenant, but if they listen to a ton of Nine Inch Nails. They're a darker and less organized version of the Covenant. They're a splinter faction that has scavenged everything they have, so not only is there a lot of aesthetic variety like I've mentioned, but there's so many different versions and classes of enemies that can use all sorts of different kinds of weapons. The brutes and the elites can basically use any gun in the game, UNSC, Forerunner, or Banished. And the brutes can even throw grunts and explosive barrels at you, which is, it's just so fun, and it keeps you on your toes. Infinite also does a fantastic job at giving you fan service without making it feel fan servicey, I guess. The Forerunner dungeon sections feel like they're straight ripped out of Halo 2, and that's not a bad thing. I love that. As you're going through these levels, keep an eye out, because you'll see like the Sentinel dispensers on the walls, like there's the pillars that you activate that come up out of the ground. I don't know what they're called. You can see Guardian Sentinels, there's a gondola. Like the interior design is just straight out of Halo 2 and Halo 3. And it makes for some of the most beautiful interior areas in all of Halo. Seeing these designs and these parts of the level again, like even the Halo 2 shoot, it doesn't feel, like I said, it doesn't feel fan servicey, it just feels right. Like it makes Halo Infinite feel much more connected to the original 3 than 4 and 5 did. And not just that, they're just good designs, and it's good to see them back. So now I want to segue into talking about the characters and the story. Infinite's story is a lot different than the other Halo games, where instead of trying to stop a galactic-wide apocalypse, this one is really more about Chief developing his relationship with the new AI, coming to terms with his humanity, figuring out what happened to Cortana, and stopping Escharum. And because it's a smaller and more intimate story, Infinite leans on its characters and their relationships a lot more than the previous games. But on the flip side of that, other than Chief, Cortana, and Jaga, I didn't think the characters were really all that interesting. I thought the pilot was a little too whiny, and watching Chief give that guy a pep talk was pretty weird. I'm just going to throw this out there and say that Halo has had a major villain problem ever since Truth bit the dust back in Halo 3. The two other villains that they've thrown out after that, the Didact and the Warden Eternal, they just weren't that great. And in 343's defense, it is hard to follow up Truth, because I think Truth is one of the best written video game villains ever. But I think a major reason 343's villains aren't all that memorable or great is because they don't get enough time to shine and develop. Truth was given 2 whole games to really develop, and they fleshed him out big time. The Didact got 1 game, and he was not even killed off at the end, but he was killed off screen in a comic book. The Warden Eternal, I don't even know what happened to that guy. And now Cortana, they set Cortana up as the big bad, and they basically retconned that in Halo Infinite, which leaves Atriox. But as we know now, Atriox was completely replaced in this game by his buddy Escharum.
Honestly, where does it end with you people?
In Halo Infinite, I think kind of continues that trend of Halo's villain problem, because the Harbinger ended up just kind of being a plot device to set up the later DLC or expansions or whatever you want to call it coming down the road. She accomplished her goal of bringing back the Endless and then immediately died.
The Endless will return.
And because of how little we got to know of the Harbinger's character, she wasn't really all that compelling of a villain. And we got to know Escharum a little bit more, but he didn't really do all that much. I liked Escharum as a character, but not the main antagonist, if that makes sense. I just don't feel like he did a whole lot. The only time that we really saw him was when he was basically yelling at us over the phone via the holograms and taunting us, or when he was behind the scenes plotting and coughing with his cronies about how to kill Chief. A big part of it may be because the game itself, the main storyline, is pretty short, but we don't really get a lot of time to get to know Escharum. So when the time finally comes to do the big final boss fight and kill him, it's not all that impactful. Not in the same way that it was when we killed Tartarus in Halo 2, or when Truth died at the end of Halo 3, killing Guilty Spark. It didn't have that same oomph to it, you know what I mean? Because we got to know all those characters, their deaths were all that more meaningful, and I don't feel like we got that with either the Harbinger or Escharum. Another good example of Halo Infinite's villain problem is Hyperius, and I think it's Trimonius. I'm not sure what the second one is. It's the 2 brute bosses where there's one on the chopper and then the other one has a giant machine gun. They don't mention this. They don't bring it up. There's no cutscene. He doesn't say anything about it, I'm pretty sure. But Hyperius is the brute that killed Agent Locke, the main character of Halo 5 other than Chief. He killed him. Locke is dead. Did you know that? No, probably not, because I'm sure you didn't walk over to Hyperius's body and scope out his armor to see that he was wearing Locke's helmet on his shoulder plate. That is such a missed opportunity, even if it was just like a cutscene where it shows Hyperius getting into his chopper, him like flexing his shoulder plate, or like taunting Chief and saying, "Oh, I killed Agent Locke and teabagged his body." You know, we don't get that. It's completely skipped over, and in a way it almost feels like some stuff was cut out of this story. There's a few other examples of stuff like that, but the biggest one that sticks out for me is Cortana just kind of randomly and suddenly deciding to give up on her campaign to basically take over the galaxy. I don't know, I feel like I'm ripping on this story quite a bit, but I did like it. I swear I liked it. The best parts of the story for me, like I said, was Chief and the weapon. I really liked their relationship and their dynamic, and in a way it feels like Infinite is the story coming full circle from Halo 4, where Halo 4 was more about Cortana teaching Chief how to be human, And now that Cortana's gone and Chief has come to terms with his humanity, it seems like he's trying to teach that back to the weapon, who doesn't really understand at first why she's still alive. She was born to die, created to do one thing and one thing only, and then die. They didn't even bother giving her a name. And I think that's an aspect of the story that a lot of people are really overlooking, Chief's connection to the weapon, because that is Chief's story. He was abducted as a child, stripped of his name, trained or created to do one thing only, kill, and then probably die. So even though Infinite didn't have the best open world ever, or the most compelling villains in the franchise, I still love this game because for me, Halo has always at its core been about Master Chief and Cortana. And I think that the way they built this connection around Chief and the weapon and developed their relationship and had this passing of the torch moment from Cortana to Chief and the weapon, that was really awesome. And that's pretty much what I wanted out of this story. And that's what I got. So I don't want to ramble on too long because I feel like this has been going on forever and I've said a lot, almost everything I wanted to say, not quite. But at the end of the day, Infinite set out to achieve a few different goals. To give longtime fans the breath of fresh air that they desperately needed, and to set up the series for the next 10 years. And when you look at the game overall, I see a very strong foundation for the game to really build on itself and evolve and progress over time, not only with its story and the campaign, but the multiplayer as well, which we're going to get into in another video. This video has been a lot different than the stuff that I usually make on this channel. Obviously, I have face cam now, and I didn't really have a script for this. I just kind of tried to formulate my thoughts as best I could. So let me know what you thought of the video. Leaving a like on it really helps out a lot. If you're new around here, consider subscribing to stick around, and let me know down in the comments what you think of the setup, the cat, everything. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Keep an eye out for the other videos I've got coming down the pipeline. I'm going to be talking about my thoughts on the Halo multiplayer as a whole, and a separate video is going to be dedicated to absolutely tearing the monetization and the progression system apart. But that's all I have for you today. Until next time, guys, have a good one.